I'm Caroline Hyde in London. This is the best of Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all our top interviews from this week in tech. Coming up, Zuckerberg breaks his silence and is called to testify in D.C. The fallout over the revelation that data firm Cambridge Analytica got access to info on millions of Facebook users. Plus, Uber halts its autonomous car tests after a pedestrian in Arizona is killed. Where Uber goes from here. And Tencent revenue jumps, but the company celebrates the good news with a warning. We'll look at the latest earnings report at Asia's most valuable company. First to our lead, and what a week it was for Facebook. The fallout continues from the site's exploitation of data from millions of its users by political consulting firm Cambridge Analytica, which has links to President Donald Trump. Now, the stock got hammered this week and led to a larger slump in tech. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg broke his silence on the crisis after staying silent a few days, with a mea culpa on CNN Wednesday.
This was a major breach of trust, and I'm really sorry that this happened. We have a basic responsibility to protect people's data. And if we can't do that, then we don't deserve to have the opportunity to serve people.
Zuckerberg pledged to investigate whether Cambridge Analytica still holds the information it obtained from a third-party app creator and promised to broaden the probe to other developers that may have run afoul of Facebook's rules. Still, these pledges weren't enough for some, and on Thursday, Zuckerberg was called to appear before a House panel, saying Zuckerberg is, quote, the right witness to provide answers to the American people. Now, Emily Chang spoke with Mike Hoflinger on Thursday. He's Facebook's former head of global business and the author of Becoming Facebook, the 10 challenges that define the company that's disrupting the world.
I think we have a very, very unique situation here simply because of the scale at which Facebook is now operating and the relevance that it has in all of our lives. I think we saw Mark say exactly the right thing yesterday, that this is, of course, all about trust. When you get into a situation like this as a leader, you have to remember that it is about trust and heart and communicating in that way, as opposed to communicating logistics and brain. And I think we've seen even giant technology leaders like Andy Grove struggle with rationalizing their way through the Pentium processor crisis maybe in the 90s, or even Steve Jobs trying to rationalize away the iPhone antenna gate back in the 2000s. The time is now for him to show, just how committed he is to these expectations that we've made very clear to him.
You've seen Facebook weather many other crises. Do you think, though, that this time public trust in Facebook is fundamentally damaged?
I think it is, and I think it probably comes on the back of a 15-month arc where we began to wonder a little bit how we feel about newsfeed, where we began to wonder whether we were potentially being manipulated either organically or through paid means. And we're now, of course, in the last week, we've become very cognizant of the fact that our data may be making its way to places that we had never agreed to. And Facebook clearly needs to understand that we don't expect Cambridge Analytica or Alexander Kogan to take care of us. We expect Facebook to take care of us. And I think that is the message that Mark, Cheryl, and others are receiving very clearly now. And just given the scale at which they are impacting our lives in good ways and perhaps some ways that we need to take a harder look at, it is important that they hear that now.
Absolutely. There have been clips circulating of things that Zuckerberg has said over the years. In 2009, he told the BBC Facebook wouldn't ever sell user data, that data belongs to users. Is that a lie, or is that just painfully misleading?
I don't think it's a lie. I think it's important to understand that to the extent Facebook sells anything, it's access to people, to communicate with people, to connect with people. But what they have to do is really take great care of that access. Who are the players that are able to receive that access, who is given access to people, and what are they able to communicate. And understanding that while he wants to open the world to many, many voices being able to communicate on Facebook, which has been so crucial to the positive changes that they've brought, to 2.25 billion people using it, that they need to really take care of us when it comes to the manipulators that want to enter the system, and to create a system that does not allow them to be a part of it to begin with, and certainly does not allow them to get distribution into the newsfeed that plays such an important role in our lives.
That said, how does Facebook make that decision about who should and shouldn't have access? If in the end it's a judgment call, and obviously we know that there are malicious actors out there that want to break the rules, and then how does that ultimately impact the business if that data is now not available?
Absolutely right. I think there are some things that are incredibly clear. For many, many, many years, Facebook has had to prevent Nazi sympathizer content, for example, from being distributed in Germany. They have had to, of course, keep nudity and other objectionable content off the platform. Those are extremely black and white, very clear issues. When it comes to subtlety, communication, maybe even by smaller voices, you can't just ask yourself, how big is this voice that's speaking, therefore they should have access. The point of Facebook is that so many, many voices around the world can have access. But we began to hear a little bit more from Zuckerberg yesterday, actually, about their ability to use artificial intelligence to interdict what are clearly fake accounts and what are, we're beginning to use this phrase, bad actors. And I think we will see an era now going forward of Mark really beginning to put his finger much harder on the scale of newsfeed, to really throttle and close the aperture on distribution on newsfeed for sources whom we cannot trust clearly, verifiably, and also for sources that we simply may not know a lot about.
On Thursday, tech stocks suffered their worst day in 6 weeks, erasing almost $200 billion of market cap from the industry. Now, they were pulled lower as President Trump ordered tariffs on Chinese goods, and Facebook continued to trade lower amid the Cambridge Analytica data scandal. Emily Chang caught up with Romain Bostick, editor of Bloomberg's Top Live blog, and Bloomberg Gadfly columnist Tim Culpen on Thursday to talk through the market turbulence.
What's interesting is if you think of the major areas that Donald Trump was talking about, essentially metals and so forth, metals and minerals only account for less than 7% of US imports from overseas. So it's actually not a very, very big area. The largest area is electrical machinery, and that's a very broad term that includes everything from mobile phones to microwaves to electric motors. So it's very broad, but that is a much larger area of imports. But then you look at the tech sector in the US. I mean, the largest company is Apple, and of course that's a hardware maker. Then we've got Amazon and Facebook and Google and all those other companies, Microsoft. They don't really do much hardware. And so these are companies that if you put up barriers, tariffs, I mean, who are you looking at there? Because, the Chinese, they make a lot of electronics products. Of course, the iPhone and pretty much every smartphone in the world, apart from those made by Koreans, is made in China. Most computers are made in China, often by US brands. So, when Donald Trump talks about putting on tariffs and he talks about protecting the United States, what is the objective here? It's not very, very clear. He seems to be lashing out, and of course steel is a great area because you can talk about American workers and all the steel jobs lost. But, in the tech sector, most of US tech is actually not hardware anymore.
Now, Romain, walk us through what exactly is happening with tech stocks, what relates to tariffs and what relates to specifically what's going on right now with Facebook and the Cambridge Analytica controversy.
Yeah, well, you've got two big issues here. There's this issue about the fact that tech was sort of this leader, and most of the profits that folks have seen this year in the market have largely been in that large cap tech space and in that semiconductor space. So when you get this sort of crowded trade where everyone's sort of benefiting on the way up, as soon as there is a negative catalyst, everyone's going to rush out the door. That's what you saw with the Facebook when the Facebook allegations came to light last week and spilled over into this week. You're also seeing it to a smaller extent with trade. There is a bigger issue here, though, about just the general idea of how much people trust this market right now. We went through this period in this market where everyone was buying on any small bit of news that they could hold on to. Now we're seeing the exact opposite of that. Any reason people have to sell, they're selling. The Facebook matter has raised a lot of questions about the viability of the business model. We're still a long way from knowing exactly how that's going to shake out, but not a lot of people trust the process right now to wait and see what's going to happen. You're seeing the same issue on trade. People just really aren't trusting in the process of what's going on out of Washington, and they just don't want to wait around and see.
Tim, how is China specifically likely to respond to these tariffs?
Well, what's interesting, I think, is beyond the tariffs. The thing about tariffs, when Trump comes out and makes a big statement, or any US leader comes out and makes a big statement, what you're doing is you're giving fodder to the Chinese to react. If the US doesn't do anything or doesn't say anything or put anything in writing, then it's much more difficult for the Chinese to react. But when you're putting something concrete down, concrete measures such as tariffs, then the Chinese can turn around and say, hey, you're starting a trade war, you're doing this, you're doing that. And one issue that came out of the news today is beyond the tariffs, Trump has told the Treasury Secretary to look into finding ways to restrict investment into the United States by Chinese companies in order to protect technology. Now, this has been an ongoing theme for many years, even before the Trump administration, the Obama administration, even the Bush administration before that. This has been a big concern. But this has been handled by CFIUS. You know, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the US works behind closed doors, chaired by the Treasury Secretary, and when they come out with a pronouncement or they knock back a deal, they don't have to tell anybody why. They simply recommend to the President, and the President would go through with it. But if they come out and put down in writing the rules of, you know, what can and can't be invested by Chinese into the US, then suddenly you've put down in writing concrete steps that the Chinese can then react against. And they can hold out that piece of paper and say, hey, you said that we can't do this. Well, we're not going to allow you to do that. So the fact that CFIUS works behind closed doors, I mean, we're all for pro-open government, but the fact that it works behind closed doors does give the US a certain amount of cover to say, well, we're not going to tell you exactly why a deal was knocked back. But if you put it down in writing, then you're giving ammunition to the Chinese.
Thanks to Bloomberg's Romain Bostic and Tim Culpen. Now, this week, YouTube introduced tighter restrictions on videos involving weapons, becoming the latest battleground in the US gun control debate. The site was previously a popular platform for firearms enthusiasts. YouTube will ban videos that promote or link to websites selling firearms and accessories, and prohibit videos with instructions on how to assemble firearms. Now, coming up, Uber's fatal autonomous crash in Tempe, Arizona. How big of an impact this might have on the future of autonomous driving. Next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can now listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the US on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg. Now to the tragic death of a woman hit by an Uber self-driving car in Tempe, Arizona. Footage released on Thursday brought fresh scrutiny to the ride-hailing company's autonomous vehicle technology. The video shows that the pedestrian had crossed at least one open lane of road before being hit, and experts are saying Uber's self-driving sensors should have detected her. Uber has halted all autonomous vehicle tests. We spoke with Bloomberg Technology's Mark Bergen on Tuesday as the story was still unfolding.
I think what the autonomous vehicle community and a lot of companies at large are still waiting to see if there was a perception issue, if there was an issue with the car, if there was an issue with the Volvo that Uber is using, or if, like the police have suggested, that if something is just purely unavoidable, if it was human or software in control.
Nothing real update from Uber, but as you say, other companies listening out, the likes of Apple, Waymo, GM, all building their own autonomous vehicles or testing that sort of technology. Are we yet to hear or see any reaction from these sorts of companies?
We've seen some reaction. Toyota has suspended their autonomous testing. They put out a statement this morning saying that they're concerned about the emotional state of their safety drivers. GM Cruise has said that they're continuing to plan. There's no stops. They're planning to launch a service next year. We've not heard from Waymo, which is considered the technical leader in the field. We've yet to hear from Apple. There is one city, Boston, has actually put an ultimatum, is temporarily pausing all tests there. They have a startup called called Autonomy that's testing the city. We did hear that Pittsburgh, where Uber is testing and other companies, has said that its business that these companies can continue to test on the road, so they're not changing any plans.
There's an interesting piece out today really showing that perhaps Apple is getting into autonomous vehicles far more than we perhaps had perceived, particularly in California. Can you update us on that?
Yeah, as far as we know, it sounds like Apple has more cars on the road than Waymo. Part of that may be that Waymo's been doing this for a very long time, and they've been testing California roads for almost 9 years now. And what Waymo is, California has been a little less receptive and open. They have laws now in the books that there has to be a human in the vehicle. And there's states like Arizona and Texas and Washington that are a little more deregulated. And so you have companies like Uber and Waymo just testing a lot more miles now in Arizona than they would be in California.
Bloomberg Technology's Mark Bergen there. Now, as we know, companies including Alphabet, General Motors, Uber and Tesla are investing billions of dollars to develop driverless technology. And Loop Ventures' Gene Munster believes humans should not drive and that traffic and pedestrian fatalities will decline under autonomy. Emily Chang spoke with him on Thursday.
This is going to take longer than people think to get to the self-driving world, but it's going to be a bigger change than people think, too. I look back to pictures of the 1917. That's when horses were at the peak on the roads in New York City, the most number of horses. And when I see a car today, I think of those same horses. That's what you should think of when you see a car out there, is this is going to change dramatically. But I want to get to your question. The reason why I think that this still is going to power forward and that we will see this autonomous future is that ultimately, humans are not good drivers. Every year in the U.S., 5,400 people are killed. Pedestrians are killed by cars. Another 1,000 bicyclists are killed by cars. And it just simply, and that rate has been increasing. It increased by 11% last year. That's the biggest increase it's had since they've been keeping records for the past 30 years. And so something is fundamentally wrong with how humans drive. So I just want the big picture to be on the table. And just to talk a little bit about Tempe, is I don't think that this fundamentally changes the trajectory of all those trends we just talked about, is that machines are better drivers than humans.
So you have a new note out about, where specific automakers stand. Talk to us about who's in the lead and Uber specifically, given that they're the ones behind this horrible crash.
So in the lead is Waymo, just because they have the most miles driven. General Motors claims that they're going to have level 5 autonomy, which is no steering wheel in 2019. And so some may say that General Motors is in the lead, but I want to put a little bit of perspective on that prediction from General Motors. Last week we did a call with an expert who works around these vision technologies that are used in self-driving cars. And when she talked about that prediction from General Motors, and she's based in Detroit, she laughed. And I have a feeling that she is still laughing at that prediction. And so when we think about defining what is in the lead, a simple statement from General Motors isn't necessarily evidence of that lead. But I think that Waymo is, from a technology standpoint, in the lead. I think another company that people are not talking about is what Apple's doing. They surprisingly have the most number of self-driving cars on the road in the state of California, 46. And they also have a bus called PALE, the Palo Alto to Infinite Loop shuttle that they're working on. So the simple answer is it's companies like Waymo, Tesla, Apple, and Uber still is in the lead.
So, how far away then, given what has happened with Uber, from how many years away are we from, being sure that these self-driving cars are actually safe and safer than humans?
It's probably 2025 before we actually see measurable fleets out there. That's how it's going to start, is self-driving cars that have limited speeds and limited areas that they work in. So think of this as, call it 7 years away. As you mentioned, is that Mark Grangard from our Loop Ventures team went through and looked at all the major automotive companies and what their predictions are. Most of them say they're going to have some high level of autonomy between 2019 and 2023. So we think it's beyond that. That will naturally get pushed back. But it is, as we talked about, is inevitable.
That was Loop Ventures' Gene Munster. Now, coming up, Tencent's raking it in thanks to WeChat. We head to Hong Kong and look at just how well the Chinese internet giant did during its fourth quarter. Next. And a reminder that all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are now live streaming on Twitter. Check us out. It's @Technology, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. A story we continue to watch. Uber co-founder Travis Kalanick is buying a controlling stake in a real estate company called City Storage Systems for $150 million and installing himself as CEO. Now, the company redevelops distressed retail, parking and industrial real estate. Kalanick was ousted as Uber's CEO last year. He's since sold $1.4 billion of the company's stock. Now, big news for Chinese internet giant Tencent, announcing on Wednesday that its profits doubled to $3.3 billion during its fourth quarter. A driver for growth continues to be WeChat, as Chairman Pony Ma pointed out.
Our platforms also continue to gather strength. Combined MAU of Weixin and WeChat increased 11% year-on-year to 989 million in 2007, and exceeds 1 billion after the 2018 Chinese New Year.
We headed to Hong Kong and spoke with Bloomberg's chief North Asia correspondent, Stephen Engel.
Tencent still stuck to its bread and butter, and that is, of course, mobile and PC gaming with like Honor of Kings, and also leveraging off its more than 1 billion users in its WeChat social messaging platforms, also QQ, to drive that user base as well to other services that they are spending a lot more money to build out, to go beyond that core competency, like cloud computing, like artificial intelligence, like the financial services, the WeChat Pay, and the like. So the margins have been squeezed. Now, when you have more than 1 billion users on WeChat alone in the first quarter of this year, it kind of begs the question, and these were questions that were raised to Pony Ma yesterday here in Hong Kong at that news conference, and that is, is there a chance to have a security breach a la Facebook at Tencent? And this is what Pony Ma, or actually this is what Martin Lau, he's the president of the company, had to say, basically saying there's no chance that could happen.
This is, at the top of our concern, because we felt this is really, our responsibility, and this is, the basis of the users' trust with us. So that's why we have a lot of different measures, including technical measures to prevent the leak of data.
Now, a couple of other notes from the Tencent press conference. Another reason why the margins are being squeezed is costs soared about 72% in the fourth quarter as they've been acquiring more content in video and music. And also Martin Lau saying, the timing is getting closer to a possible IPO for its music division. Also saying that they could, if the market conditions are correct, return to China with a domestic listing, a CDR listing. But again, the rules in China would need to be changed for that to happen. But the Chinese government wants these big Chinese tech companies to come back and list on the mainland. Of course, Tencent is listed in Hong Kong.
Yeah, Stephen, it's fascinating, actually, how much Tencent is spreading its investment, even over here in Europe. I mean, just earlier this week, we've had Tencent put money into a fintech startup based in Germany called N26. And some of these then are listing and managing to contribute to overall profits. But you say about listing at home. What about the general focus of the business going forward? Are people worried about the investments that they do make in these areas?
Well, this is a heated competition with the likes of Alibaba, of course, to create this ecosystem, not only in China, but globally. Alibaba maybe has a head start on global, but, Tencent, they've acquired more than 600 companies, or acquired or invested in more than 600 companies. So they are definitely going beyond their bread and butter in gaming and social media, in payment and financial services, and in other developing parts of the world, including, of course, Europe.
Bloomberg Chief North Asia correspondent Stephen Engel. Now, coming up, back to the fallout of the Facebook data story, we turn to the political response, both in the US and Europe. Next, this is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde in London. Now, let's turn back to the top story of the week, Facebook. Last year, Mark Zuckerberg made headlines with his tour of the American heartland. Well, now, the Facebook CEO may have to get ready to embark on a tour of Europe and its governments. Lawmakers in the UK and the European Union have requested that Zuckerberg appear before them to answer questions on the alleged misuse of user data by Cambridge Analytica. We spoke with UK Member of Parliament Damien Collins on Tuesday about whether Zuckerberg has responded to his invite.
I think he should agree. It's down to him whether he chooses to or not. But I think it's been really noticeable that we've heard nothing from him so far since this story broke a few days ago about the data breach and the involvement of Cambridge Analytica. And I also think as well there are important outstanding questions that we have as a committee following the evidence session we had with Facebook in Washington last month. We asked them then expressly about their relationship with Cambridge Analytica. We asked them about the way in which developers can harvest user data from Facebook and about the enforcement powers Facebook have to get back control of that data. I don't think we received satisfactory answers to any of those questions. So I think it requires someone at the top of the company whose job it is to know every detail and who can go through this properly.
This misuse of data of 50 million or so users of Facebook in the US is surrounding the 2016 presidential election. You, of course, are investigating potentially the role of social media within the UK's vote to leave the EU. Do you think that Russian manipulation was done then? Do you think that Facebook has anything to answer regarding the Brexit vote?
Well, we know that there was Russian involvement during the Brexit campaign period, but at the moment, from what's been published, that appears to be at a lower level than was the case in the American presidential election. But it's still something we're looking to map out, and it is incredibly important. The UK Information Commissioner also has her own investigation looking at the way data was used during the referendum period. I certainly think data analytics were used in that time, to some extent by Russian agencies, but also by the official Leave campaign as well. I think we need to understand more, and users need to understand more about the way in which data can be used to target them with information, both from organisations they know and sometimes from Russian agencies and bodies they don't know. And there's very little transparency often around where those messages are coming from.
We've heard your voice, of course, calling for Mark Zuckerberg. We're also hearing from regulators in the United States. The FTC, there are reports that they are looking into whether Facebook has potentially broken the consent decree. Do you think regulators will get involved in the United Kingdom as well?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting issue because in European law there are restrictions on holding data based on people's political views and opinions. But what that legislation didn't necessarily consider was the fact that people may harvest huge amounts of consumer data. Data that people consented to give as part of, surveys on their opinions or on their consumer habits, but they never consented for that data to be used in a political campaign, and particularly to be held and used by a company that's not a registered political party. So I think this is a big area of concern and something that the UK Information Commissioner is looking at.
Do you think that any changes will be put in place internally by Facebook? What changes would you want to see to ensure that your minds are put at rest that this won't occur again?
Well, I suppose our concerns are the way in which they handle and manage data, to understand how easy it is for developers and others to acquire data off of the Facebook site by their engagement with Facebook users, and then how Facebook police what happens to that data. Because for many people who are Facebook users every day of the week, they will be looking at this story and asking themselves the questions, well, how come Facebook got that much data about me, and what do they do with it, and is that data safe? And that's what Facebook have to provide reassurance of people on, is that they are a safe custodian of that data. And I think a lot of the outstanding questions we have for Facebook are around that. There's also the other question about promoted messaging through Facebook, paid for messaging through Facebook itself, and whether Facebook is good at policing that messaging and understanding who the advertiser is, and if it's a political campaign, that advertiser isn't breaking any electoral laws by seeking to advertise from a foreign country into a country like the UK or the USA. I think these are important areas of understanding business practice and ethics that we need to get to the bottom of.
Do you believe social media companies, not just Facebook, but Twitter and Google's YouTube, have become too powerful?
They have a huge amount of power. And I think if they think that they are too powerful and therefore slightly above the reach of governments and parliaments, then I think as organisations that believe those things often do, they will find that it is different, that ultimately it doesn't matter how big you are, you have to comply with the law in the territories where you operate, and if you don't, there are sanctions that can be used against you. But what we should look to Facebook is to be responsible and to act in a responsible way, and at the moment I think it's incumbent on them to demonstrate that they are, and for the people that own and run that company to be more forthcoming and provide clearer answers to the questions we're putting.
And have they responded to you as yet?
Well, as I said, we have outstanding questions from the evidence session, the hearing we had with Facebook last month. They still haven't responded to those outstanding questions, even though the hearing was over a month ago. And obviously we've said today that we want Mark Zuckerberg or someone of similar or equal rank in the company to give evidence to us. So I think they do need to respond, and I think they do need to explain around the Cambridge Analytica data breach, what occurred, why was it that they knew about this 2 years ago but didn't act then to ensure that the data had been recovered.
That was British Member of Parliament Damian Collins there. And sticking with the European response to Facebook, the European Commissioner for Justice, Vera Jourova, spoke in Brussels on Thursday and said she was formulating a letter to Facebook over the data scandal. The penalties for violating consumers' privacy are far stiffer in Europe than in America, but Facebook will likely escape unprecedented fining powers for the EU that only take effect on May the 25th. That means they could avoid paying 25 million or 4% of their annual revenue, whichever is higher. Bloomberg's Vonnie Quinn spoke with the EU's Jourova about this exact scenario and just what she expects to hear from Facebook in their upcoming meeting.
I will have several serious questions especially on how this could have happened, whether they have neglected the privacy rules, whether they were careful enough, and whether they were following the rules which should have ensured the trust for the people, because these are essential questions also for the Europeans.
Now, you are curtailed to some extent in what kind of sanctions you could impose were you to find Facebook negligent in some way. You said, though, that you would be imposing really, drastic sanctions. How would you do that?
At this moment in Europe, the member states are responsible for imposing the sanctions. So, for instance, the United Kingdom, in case the breach of privacy rules will be proven, they can impose the sanction up to £500,000. And these sanctions differ from state to state, which will stop in May this year, because we are unifying the rules, including the sanctions, and the new General Data Protection Regulation will enable the member states to impose much higher sanctions, which cannot be applied on this current case because there is no retroactivity possible.
Exactly. That starts May 25th. Well, you are asking the working group, the 29 Working Party, to investigate all of this. Have you contacted every single nation in the EU? Are all on board with this?
All the member states are represented in Working Party 29. They met yesterday, and as one, they confirmed that they are unified in launching the investigations in case they find out that the privacy rules and the rights of people in their states have been or might have been breached. And this is a very important moment, because I think that if they connect and if they join the powers, they can take consolidated pan-European actions.
Could this set some kind of precedent, Commissioner? What are you hoping for as an outcome if Facebook were to be found guilty or negligent in some way?
I am not happy at all about this case, because in my view, this is not only about data protection breaches. This is about the threat to democracy and individual freedoms of people. So, of course, this will serve as a precedent for the future. And I can say that in Europe we are ready for these cases, also as for the preventive measures, because, as I mentioned, the regulation is very tough. enough. We require very strict rules to be obeyed in the EU, especially as far as the consent of the people is concerned, because we want the providers to have the consent of people, the people who must understand the purpose, why the data is collected, and what the provider will do with the data. And of course, it is clear that the providers are monetizing the data, but the people must know what is behind that and what are the plans.
That was the European Commissioner for Justice, Vera Jourova, speaking to Bloomberg's Vonnie Quinn. And in the halls of Capitol Hill, criticism of Facebook also reached a fever pitch. Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana is part of a bipartisan effort to publicly question tech CEOs before a hearing. He caught up with Bloomberg's Kevin Cirilli and discussed why he wants to get Facebook to Washington.
It's no longer a company, it's a country. I mean, it's very powerful. They touch millions and millions, billions of people. Data is the new oil. We need to ask some hard questions because some of Facebook's behavior lately has kind of gotten into the foothills of creepy.
Coming up, when it comes to cloud computing, Salesforce is already a towering force, and it looks to cement that stature with its latest acquisition. Next, this is Bloomberg. Now, while the financial community watches an internal crisis unfold at Facebook, with a lot of market valuation lost in the process, Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos tweeted this, a picture of himself strutting in the sunshine with a robotic dog. Mark Zuckerberg may see himself sinking one spot on the world's rich list, but Bezos continues to sit pretty in that #1 spot, especially as Amazon vaults ahead of internet rival Alphabet in market value for the first time. And when it comes to conquering the cloud, companies like Amazon and Microsoft, SAP and Salesforce are all vying to be the top provider. And it's the latter that's viewed as one of the main disruptors in the field, and the only large-cap software company with more than 20% sales growth for the past 3 years. And this week, Salesforce announced its $6.5 billion deal to buy MuleSoft to help expand its platform-as-a-service portfolio. We spoke with Salesforce's president and chief product officer, Brett Taylor, on Thursday. Prior to that, he served as Facebook's chief technology officer.
If you look at the landscape of technology right now, I think it's changing more rapidly today than it has in generations. The World Economic Forum calls it the fourth industrial revolution, but it's not just one change. It's artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, mobility, this smartwatch, Amazon Alexa. And for a company like a Google or a Facebook, where I was previously, we have buildings full of engineers to sort of grapple with those changes. But if you're a 100-year-old insurance company or healthcare company trying to figure out how do I provide a customer experience in the face of all this change, it's really challenging to do. And fundamentally, that's our mission at Salesforce, is helping every company in the world grapple with these technological changes and transform their customer experiences. And it's really rewarding as a product developer to empower so many companies to do that.
Now, this announcement that you've agreed to buy MuleSoft for $6.5 billion, what can we read into it? Because it seems to be a desire to stretch beyond Salesforce's core customer relationship management tools.
You know, so if you think about what it means to transform a company that wasn't born in the digital era, this digital transformation, we fundamentally think it starts and ends with the customer, even if that means transforming a bunch of your legacy systems. And the reason why we're so interested in MuleSoft and this concept of sort of integrating all of these legacy systems is it really unlocks the data from legacy systems to enable people to participate in all these amazing new experiences, and we're seeing on our phones and our watches and through customer service experiences that are really transforming business today. So, you know, I do think MuleSoft's platform is amazing because it really enables companies to kind of turbocharge their digital transformation. And for Salesforce specifically, it means that they can transform their customer experiences faster, which is really our mission.
Now, Salesforce has been very acquisitive, including buying your own company, Quip. The deal chatter around Salesforce potentially buying Twitter doesn't ever seem to stop. I know you're intimately familiar with Twitter. You are on the board. Do you see Salesforce making more big deals in the near term?
You know, fundamentally, we work backwards from what are the technologies that we need to have to enable our customers to achieve their goals. And we always work backwards from the customer and the customer experience. And we'll always consider either building, buying, or partnering to accomplish those goals. And that will continue to be our strategy going forward.
Your current focus is Trailhead X, Salesforce's third annual developer conference. What are the objectives here?
So the really cool thing about Salesforce as a platform is we're not just targeting developers. We're trying to make a platform that enables a much broader range of people to have access to these new technologies. So this event, which is happening in San Francisco next week, the thousands of people who come here, many of them made a mid-career transition into technology, started outside the technology industry and learned for free using our self-learning tools like Trailhead. And by doing so, they were able to actually get a career in technology. What I think is so powerful about that and why this event is so powerful, if you look at the landscape of technology today and all the news stories you were just talking about, the society's relationship with the technology industry has really shifted over the past few years. And what I'm so proud of at Salesforce is we're really doubling down on this platform of enablement and empowerment and trying to create a job creation engine so that not only can we transform our customers' companies, but people can transform their careers through this platform. And I think that's a really empowering message, and that's really what we're trying to get across at Trailhead DX next week.
Now, you worked at Facebook for so many years. You are very close with Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg, and I'm so curious for your thoughts on this Cambridge Analytica scandal. Where did Facebook go wrong? And, you know, what do you make of Zuckerberg and Sandberg's response, which many think was just far too slow?
I think the trend I see is just broadly the technology industry coming to grips with the impact we're having on society. And I brought up that fourth industrial revolution concept from the World Economic Forum. I think that's really apt because it captures how big this is. And as the technology industry is maturing, I think we need to recognize that this isn't just about technology. It's about the impact on our society. And my boss, Mark Benioff, often talks about how important it is that modern companies lead with their values, and particularly lead with the value of trust, and work backwards from that value in every action that you take. And I do think that when I look at the sort of lessons being learned in our industry right now, it's just reinforcing that it's the most important thing in our industry is trust, and it's extremely important that your company is crafted around your values. And I think it's a lesson that we haven't really had to learn to date, just because I don't think the impact of these technologies was honestly completely understood by society. And I think that's what's happening right now, is sort of those two things converging.
Right, but you wonder if they were completely or better understood by Facebook. You have people like Brian Acton, the co-founder of WhatsApp, which Facebook bought for $20 billion, saying to delete Facebook, and other former Facebook insiders really talking about the potential threats of the social network. Are you in that camp?
I have a great deal of personal connection and loyalty to that company, so it is obviously sort of uncomfortable for me to talk about. The thing I would say is that I do think that it's the right way to think about it is that these technologies have changed sort of the landscape of our society. Everything from the smartphone to social networks have changed the way we interact with each other. And they're much more than a technology. They actually change our behavior and change our interactions. I think right now, we always like to say at Salesforce that these companies don't exist just to serve stockholders or customers. It's really about all stakeholders, and that includes the communities around us, it includes the government, it includes all of our society. And I think that right now, the way I think about it is, okay, these technologies are complex, their impact is very nuanced. How can we include all the stakeholders in coming up in the way to solve these problems?
That was Brett Taylor of Salesforce. Still ahead, we'll hear from BlackBerry CEO John Chen, his thoughts on whether big tech should get broken up. This is Bloomberg. Now, virtual reality was supposed to change the world, but it has yet to really arrive. And with it facing a threat to be supplanted by augmented reality, will it ever deliver? Oculus is trying to make sure it does with their new headset. Bloomberg's Mark Gurman took it for a test.
Virtual reality. It was supposed to be the new way to look at the world, but it's yet to take off the way Hollywood told us it would. But Oculus, a division of Facebook, is trying to change that. Their plan, the Oculus Go. It's a new strategy. It's cheaper and a different approach to VR. Unlike headsets from HTC, Sony, and even Oculus's high-end Rift headset range, the Go is a completely standalone device. It doesn't need to be chained to a powerful desktop or laptop Windows PC. It has a smartphone chip and a rechargeable battery, so it can be used similar to a phone, tablet, or even something like an iPod Touch. You can watch movies on the go, play games, and interact with immersive social media apps. According to the latest data, Oculus has 20% ownership of the VR headset market. That trails 40% ownership by Sony's PlayStation VR system. That gives Oculus a lot of room for growth. But at the same time, VR has also been referred to by many as a platform that will soon be supplanted by AR, augmented reality, basically a cousin of VR that mixes the real world with the virtual world. Tech pioneers like Amazon and Apple are focusing on AR, seemingly not believing in VR as a winning long-term strategy. So, while the Oculus Go might be a hit product this year and next, it could also be a short-lived success story. We'll find out soon.
Bloomberg's Mark Gurman there. Now, BlackBerry has added another major brand to its portfolio of partnerships on car software. Jaguar has agreed to license BlackBerry's technology. The luxury car maker also will host some of the company's engineers to work on a new infotainment system. BlackBerry also has deals with Ford and Qualcomm. Now, Bloomberg's Jonathan Ferro spoke with BlackBerry CEO John Chen on Thursday. Highlighting news of the week, the current Facebook crisis, we started the conversation by asking his thoughts on whether big tech should have to get broken up.
As you could probably tell, 10 years ago, the name of big techs, and the 10 years from today, the name of big techs are quite different. So, technology has a way to, the market has a way to reinvent itself. And so I'm not a big proponent of breaking it up.
Well, John, to reinvent itself, you need innovation. And I'm wondering whether these big technology firms foster innovation and foster competition. What's your view on that, John?
No, it can, really. This is a great thing about, technology market. I remember when Google first started out, Yahoo was dominant. When Yahoo first started out, Netscape was dominant. You could look at all the history of technology evolution. It's really about the people, the creativity, the brains and behind it, and the venture money. And so I don't see that being monopolistic in any way, shape, or form.
John, at the heart of some of these business models that are incredibly profitable is this ad model that's dependent on personal data. Do you see that model being threatened with the events of the last year?
Yeah, I think you've gone a little too far. That's my personal opinion. At BlackBerry, we don't monetize data, and so certainly not against the customer who provided the data. So I believe that needs to be looked at.
BlackBerry CEO John Chen there. And that does it for this edition of the Best of Bloomberg Technology. We'll bring you all the latest in tech throughout the week. Tune in each day, 5 p.m. New York time, 2 p.m. San Francisco, 10 p.m. London. Remember, all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are now live streaming on Twitter. Check us out as @Technology Weekdays. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.